So our first instruction today is how to make parallels. And we're going to learn two methods. Our first method is going to have to do with congruent angles. So for our problem, we're going to start with a line and a point that's not on the line. And our goal is to make a line that's parallel to the starting line through that starting point. So you can kind of eyeball and visualize what that's going to look like in the end, but we don't want to just sketch it in. We want to actually construct in a way that it will be parallel. What we're going to do is think back to when we learned about parallels and some special angles that showed up. So when we learned about parallel lines, we would have parallel lines in this transversal or line going across them, and there were some sets of angles that were special for us. And one of those sets of angles was this kind, which is corresponding angles. And we learned that if the lines are parallel, those corresponding angles should be congruent. So that's what we're going to do here, is try to kind of recreate that picture. So step one is going to be to connect point line with any given angle you want. It doesn't matter. Just draw a line that goes through the point and through the line. So now we've got our starting line, the bottom one, and we have that transversal going through. So now what we want to do is take this angle that's down at the bottom and copy it so that we have the same size angle up at the top. So this reviews the very first construction we learned, which is how to copy or create a congruent angle. So we're going to create a congruent angle. If you don't want to write down these steps because you already have them in lesson 1, that's fine. If you want to write them again, it never hurts to review something and write it out more than once. So to create a congruent angle, the first thing we're going to do is make an arc across angle and then make the same arc at our point. So anywhere we have an intersection is a good place to put a point, and anywhere we have a point is a good place to put our compass point. So what we're going to do is put our compass point on that given point and make an arc that goes across the angle. Doesn't matter how big. Remember, we're kind of thinking about Goldilocks. We don't want to do things huge, but we don't want to do them tiny. So I'm going to make an arc across, and then I'm going to make that same exact size arc up at the top. Okay, so I put my compass point on the corner of the angle and make an arc, and then put my compass point on the point we originally started with and make an arc. One common mistake that students make is that they put their compass point on the place where the first arc hits the line. We don't want to build from there. We want to build from our starting point. Okay, so compass point on the point or vertex of the angle, and then compass point on the point where we want this whole thing to come together. Then we're going to use the compass to measure the width of the angle, and we're going to copy that width to the other arc. So to use our compass as a measuring tool, I'm going to put points at the places where these arcs are hitting the lines. And what I'm going to do is place my compass point on one of those and place the compass pencil on the other side of the arc. So I'm going to have my compass measuring from one side of that arc to the other side to tell me how wide that angle is. Then I'm going to take that width and bring it on up to the top to make a mark. So compass point at one side of the angle and compass pencil at the other will tell me how wide that angle is. Then I'm going to bring that width up to the top arc and measure out that same width. Anywhere we get an intersection is a good place to put a point. So then our final step is connect X to point. And those two lines should be parallel, give or take some human error. I expect a little bit of human error involved in this, so here's a warning. Most of you, if not all of you, are doing your problems on lined paper. Okay? So you will be able to tell whether your lines are actually parallel or not if you have them following the lines of your paper. But do not just trace out lines of your paper. Okay? That would be marked wrong. Okay? So I'm looking for these construction markings. So if I don't see the right arcs and I don't see the right X's, it's going to be marked wrong because you didn't actually do a construction. You just traced something on lined paper. So think about if you were doing this on blank paper without the lines, you would have to go through this whole process. Okay? So you can kind of use the lines of your paper to guide you and as a parameter, and if it's really far off, you're going to want to try to redo it. But a little bit off is fine. I expect a little bit of human error involved in this. And if you're ever not sure, like you do it and you're like, I don't know, it's a little bit off, is it too much, just ask. And I'll let you know, that's fine, I wouldn't mark that off, or you should probably do that again. I might take a deduction there. And I'm happy to tell you that as you work through your assignments. Okay? But just a warning to not just trace lines of your paper out. It's very tempting, but I will mark it wrong if I can tell that that's all you did. Questions on this construction? For our second one, we're going to do parallels again, but we're going to do a different method. So for this one, we're going to use two perpendicular lines. Our setup's going to be the same. We have a line, we have a point, and we want to make a parallel. To kind of sketch out what our idea here is we're going to take that line and point and we're going to make a perpendicular going down, and then we're going to make a perpendicular going across, which should then give us a set of parallels. So in our last lesson, we learned how to make both kinds of perpendiculars, so we're going to review those here. Or if you happen to be gone, then we're going to learn those here. So step one is going to be to make perpendicular from point to line. And again, I'll write out all the sub-steps on how to do this, and if you don't want to write them out, that's fine, because you may have already written them out in the last lesson. Our first step to make a perpendicular from a point to a line when it's not on the line is to make what I called a boat from the point to the line. So a given point is a good place to put our compass point. So what we're going to do is take our compass point and put it on that starting point. And then you need to open up your compass so that it is wide enough that it can cross the line. I'm going to make a boat that goes across and hits that line in two places. Okay? Put your compass point on the starting point. Have your compass open wide enough so that it'll hit that line in two places and make what I call the boat. Where we get intersections is a good place to put points. So then next we're going to, from one intersection, make mark below. And then from the other intersection, make, and this is important, the same size mark below. So these marks do not need to be the same size as your boat. They can be, but you could resize your compass. I'm going to need to resize my compass because otherwise it's going to fall off the board. You won't be able to see it, so I need to make my compass a little bit smaller. But I'm going to put my compass point at one of those intersection points on the side of the boat, and I'm going to make a mark below. Or it could actually be above, it doesn't really matter, I just usually make mine below. Then I'm going to go over to the other side, and this is important, it has to be now exactly the same size. Make a mark. Okay, so I put my compass point at one side of the boat, and I make a mark. Then with my compass set at exactly the same size, I go over to the other side of the boat and make another mark.
What's the size again?
It doesn't matter what size. As long as they're the same size on both sides, it doesn't matter what size. Where we get an X, I'm going to put a point. And we're going to then, connect that point to our starting point. So that's our last step here. Connect X to the point. So we've made one perpendicular. Our goal is to make a parallel, so to do that we need to make another perpendicular. So kind of our second big step of this is going to be to make a perpendicular from point to the new line. So we're going to use that new line we just made and the same exact starting point where this whole thing began, because that's where we want it to end too. And we're going to make another perpendicular. So this was our construction for perpendiculars when our point is on the line. And so what we're going to do then is from the point, we're going to make what I called the parentheses. Around the point. So around our point, you're going to open up your compass to some setting, doesn't matter how wide. And again, kind of Goldilocks, don't make it huge, but don't make it tiny. And you're going to put a mark on each side. Okay, to make what I called parentheses around that. Where we get intersections is a good place to label with a point. So I'm going to put some points on there. And then the process becomes exactly the same as the other problem. So then we're just going to repeat B through D from above. So from one of those parentheses, we're going to make a mark. Then, using the same exact size compass, make a mark from the other parentheses. Ooh, mine's going to be a little bit off. I can tell already. So from one of those parentheses, make a mark. Okay, so you place your point at one of those parentheses and make a mark, and then using the same exact size compass, go over to the other parentheses and make a mark. Just like we did from the two sides of the boat, do it from the two sides of the parentheses. That gives you a point that you can connect through and get a very non-parallel line in my problem because it just did not work very well here. This would be beyond the realm of acceptable error. I would suggest that this gets redone. I'm not sure. My compass must have slipped at one point. It does not work well on the iPad. But the process is correct there. It just was inaccurate. Some students are going to prefer one of these ways to the other way. This way obviously has a lot more steps involved in it than the angle copy, but for some students this way just makes more sense of, yeah, that kind of, I can follow that process of why this works better. When I taught myself constructions, I didn't have anybody to teach me, so I had to teach myself constructions, and the first time I looked at a problem that asked me to make some perpendiculars, or make parallels rather, this is what made sense to me. Was if I make a couple sets of perpendiculars, then I'll get a parallel out of that. I personally think the other way is a little bit cleaner, just because there's less steps involved in it. But it's totally up to you. Sometimes I do one way, sometimes I do the other way, depending on what I'm given in the problem. So do whichever of those two ways you feel more comfortable with when you're asked to make a parallel. As far as coloring your answer, you would need to color in the parallel line. That would be the answer, would be that new line that we created that should be parallel to the other one. Mine clearly here is not. Yeah?
Why do we need the 1 point on the bottom?
At the very bottom?
Mm-hmm.
To connect to the starting line to get that first perpendicular line. We connected that to the starting point, and that gave us the first perpendicular line. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had anything to make a perpendicular to. We connected, let me highlight it out. We had to connect this point, that's the one they were talking about, to this one, and that's what gave us that perpendicular. And then we needed that perpendicular to make the second perpendicular.
Okay.
We have one more construction to learn today, and it is a shorter construction, so that's nice. And that's how to find a midpoint. For this one, you're going to be starting with a segment. And since it's a segment, it has endpoints. Points are a good place to put a compass. So our first step is going to be from one endpoint make mark above and below. And then from the other endpoint, make the same size marks. It does not matter how big you set your compass, it has to be set to more than half the length of the segment, otherwise your arcs won't actually intersect each other and you won't be able to find the midpoint. One thing I like to do, it's not necessary, but I like to set my compass to be the size of the segment, just so that if my compass accidentally slips and I lose how it was set, it's easy to reset. But it doesn't have to be that, it just has to be bigger than half the length of the segment, and it'll work. So I put my compass point at one side and I make a mark above and below. And then go to the other side and make the same size mark above and below. Then, our last step here is going to be to connect those x's. So where we get x's is a good place to put a point. going to connect them together. And what we've done, we've actually found two different things here. So what to color depends on what the question asks. If the question asks you to find a midpoint, then what you should color is just a point, the point that is in the middle of that segment. Okay? The midpoint is specifically just that point that's in the middle there, and that would need to be the only thing that's colored. The question could also ask you to find a perpendicular bisector, and that's actually then the whole line. So if it asks you to find a perpendicular bisector, then you would want to color that entire line that we drew in there. Okay. Questions? Okay, a couple of reminders for you. Remember to write out the problem as it appears with whatever words it says. So something like, through P, make parallel to AC. Okay, whatever words are there, write out those words. And then remember to draw the picture as it appears on the paper. So for the first group of questions, you're going to be given a drawing that's going to look like this. Draw out the whole picture, even if you're not using all of it. Okay? So the example I said was through point P, make a parallel to AC. So then our final answer would look something like this. Obviously, you're going to construct it and not just sketch it like I did. So you could choose which method you like. If you like angle copy, there's already an angle there to copy. Right? If you like perpendiculars, that's fine as well. You would make your boat to get your perpendicular here, make your parentheses to get your perpendicular there. So whichever way you like better, you can do it, but make sure you draw the whole picture, even though you're not technically using the whole picture, okay? Also remember to only do about 2 to 3 problems a page. If you do 4, that's fine, I'm not going to deduct you. Just the smaller you're doing them, the more difficult they actually become for you, and the more imprecise they will be. And so then I might start to take off points if it's not very accurate because things were too small. So about 2 to 3 problems a page. And remember to not use the backs of papers. If you happen to use the backs of papers a couple times, it's not a big deal. You don't need to rip them out and start over. Just do your best to try to remember to not use the backs of pages.